And how's it going? And welcome to No Fun Alloved's guide series on Curse of Strahd, a 5th edition module. In today's video, we will be diving into Van Richten's tower, a tower that has seen better days. So before I go into anything major, I must warn you that there will be spoilers, so players do not watch this, but DMs that want added insight on how we can make this place come to life, go ahead and stick around because we have a lot to cover. And here it is, Van Richten's tower, located on the outskirts of Lake Baratok. We get some very cool information about this location. This tower was not originally Van Richten's tower. This tower was actually owned by one Kazan, a powerful mage that actually helped out Strahd many years ago. In fact, before Strahd even became a vampire. Kazan built this tower up and then made a little land area to go ahead and walk to it. And then at some point down the line, Kazan decided to go to the Emperor Temple and discover the truth to lichdom. At which point he became a lich, and after a certain amount of time actually thought about usurping Strahd's reign over this domain, but Strahd talked him down and said, hey, instead of that, how about we just, work together and whatnot. And then eventually Kazan accidentally destroyed himself, and the place basically sat there empty for many ages. Van Richten, of course, takes over this tower and uses it as a base of operations, but also interesting is Ezmerelda has found this location as well, and they're playing basically cat and mouse. They're trying to either avoid one another or catch one another, but they seem to keep missing each other. And of course, your players could show up and make that cat and mouse game come to an abrupt end. For approaching the tower, once again, every single time use this art, fantastic stuff. For approaching the tower, we get some great information on one. You get this big old exposition dump on what to say to your players, what they see. They see, of course, this 80-foot tall place that has some scaffolding on the side and clearly some windows at the top, and there is a wagon outside. Also, for approaching the tower, we get some pretty good information about Kazan's spell drain. Kazan warded this tower so that he alone could cast spells near or within it. Anyone else that tries to cast any sort of spell would be subject to a anti-magic field. And this, of course, not only is inside this tower, but also extends out to 5 feet in every direction. This is a pretty big deal because a lot of people are very reliant on magic, especially nowadays in 5th ed. I find that there's a lot of people that may need that certain magical something or other. And if they walk within 5 feet and discover their magic turns off, they may get scared and decide to not want to deal with this. So that's always something to consider. If you have a high magic party, then they may not want to be dealing with this. But of course, the real question we got to ask is, why would your players want to deal with this? Why would your players go out to the middle of nowhere to go ahead and just explore this tower? Well, we've got several hooks here. The first off being, your players get lost. If you do not give your players an actual map of the land of Barovia, they may go ahead and just start meandering about the roads and discovering what's around here. If you have an adventurous group, they may just go down the roads, at which point they will discover that if they head down this crossroads, they'll see that there is a tower there. And adventurous people are going to see a tower and be curious, so they just simply go up there and discover it. Another reason why your players may show up to this tower is because someone told them about it. Perhaps maybe someone from Vallaki or Kresk or Vistani or anybody that they come across says, oh yeah, we saw a tower over there. And yeah, we didn't go around there because, it's scary, it's out of the way, whatever the case may be. You should probably not allude to anything of that nature. But you could perhaps say, oh yeah, we saw a wagon, going down the road, and instead of it going on the road regularly, it went up to that Lake Baratok. I wonder what that wagon was doing. And that could drive some curiosity, and your players may decide to go ahead and check it out. But third, and what I seem to find usually most groups do, is have Van Richten or Ezmerelda go ahead and say, hey, meet me at this tower, because there we'll be safe, and we can go ahead and discuss things further. In which case, whether they go together as a group or one goes in front of the other, your players arrive at Van Richten's tower. What do your players find when they finally get there? Let's go ahead and dive into the map, shall we? Oh my goodness, that's a blue dragon. What's that doing here? Let's go ahead and start diving into this location, shall we? First off, we have Area 1, Ezmerelda's Magic Wagon. When your players arrive, once again, use that beautiful art, James RPG art, link down below. Of course, get it, use it, love it. Your players are going to see that there's that wagon in front, and that'll be part of the description. And something in particular is that there's a steel padlock that secures the back door, hanging from which is a cheap wooden sign that reads, "Keep out." If your players look at this thing, they will obviously determine that it is very special. And if they are unsupervised when they arrive here, you may get some characters with some sticky fingers. So they may decide to go ahead and prowl around a bit. The wagon radiates an aura of conjuration magic, and so if anybody has a detect magic spell, they'll be able to see that. And if anybody can cast Identify on it, they will determine that these are command words that are used to go ahead and drive this wagon, which is pretty cool. Anybody who sits in the driver's seat can speak aloud the word drovash, at which point a pair of quasi-real draft horses magically appear and begin being driven around the place. The driver can dismiss these horses by saying the second command word, Arvesh. But of course, the information that might be more pertinent right when your players show up here, there is a hidden trap door in the underbelly of this thing that can be detected by anybody who scuttles underneath and makes a DC 13 perception check. The trapdoor opens into the wagon and is the only safe way inside. And you see, that's a big deal, because if your players go ahead and start fooling around and trying to open this thing, then they are going to be in for a nasty trap. The inside handle of the door has a wire looped around it, and the wire is connected to a flask of alchemist fire hanging from the wagon ceiling. When the trap door is opened, the flask falls and explodes, and causes the whole thing to go kablooey. A creature within 30 feet of the wagon, when it explodes, must succeed on DC 12 Constitution saving throw, or take 10d10 points of fire damage on a failed save. A creature inside of the wagon or within 5 feet has disadvantage on this saving throw. The wagon is reduced to flinders by the explosion, and the contents of the wagon are destroyed as well. So this is pretty dangerous. If you have a lower level party show up here, this theoretically could TBK them if they are all inquisitive and they're all scumbags willing to break into someone else's thing that specifically says keep out. And of course, they're all unlucky and fail the saving throw. So you have to keep that in mind. If you have a lower level party, this could prove disastrous. And especially if it is lower level, it could outright kill people if they only have, 26 points of health, then they just outright die on average. But of course, it's not just PCs you have to be worrying about here. NPCs could be dragged along here as well, and depending on which NPC it is, whether they be commoners or friendly allies or whatever, if they get swept up in this whole explosion, that could prove disastrous as well. So keep that in mind. Don't metagame what the NPC would be doing, of course. Let your players suffer whatever it is that they put upon themselves. But the good thing is if your players are curious enough, look around, specifically crawl underneath the wagon and make a perception check. They could discover that they can find a way inside, and once they make their way inside from the underbelly, they can see the trap automatically and can disable it with a successful DC 10 dexterity check. A failed attempt to disable the trap triggers it as well. So hopefully whoever discovers this thing isn't the non-dexterous person in the party. What do players get for successfully navigating this terrible trap? Well, there is actually a ton of loot in here. There is a huge list of a whole bunch of supplies, and it becomes immediately apparent if anybody actually starts looking around here. Not only is this just awesome supplies, but this is very specific supplies. These supplies are clearly that of an undead hunter of some repute. Tons and tons of great stuff is found here. All these little items and doodads and trinkets and spell scrolls. But arguably the biggest one here is the handout of Journal of Rudolf van Richten. This is a charred page from Van Richten's journal. And the interesting thing about this is it tells a very sad and tragic story of Van Richten about how he lost his son and how he hates the Vistani, and actually paints Van Richten's character in a pretty damning light. But you can see the turn that he took and how this man went from good to morally questionable. So if your players do discover this piece of information and they don't even know who Van Richten is yet, then they're going to have some preconceived notions. But if your players already know who Van Richten is, specifically usually under the case of your players had met Rictavio was nice and cheerful and happy, and then they had to help Rictavio out in some regard, and he revealed himself to be Rudolf van Richten, then your players are going to be saying, oh man, he was a friend, but, ooh, man, this makes him kind of sketchy, possibly. So, of course, this whole potentially getting blown up and rifling through all this loot and stuff, that's only going to happen if Rudolph Van Richten or Ezmerelda are not here. But if either of them are here, they will go ahead and just say, hey, don't touch that wagon. Let me go ahead and, set it up real quick. Rudolph Van Richten would know that even though it is Ezmerelda's wagon, he would know that it is booby-trapped because he taught her, essentially. So, yeah, if your players are getting escorted here, don't have to worry about that at all. But if they show up here with no escort, then things could prove pretty hairy. In Area 2, we have the tower door. This is where things get really hairy. Your players are going to see that on the door there is this intricate symbol, a whole bunch of what appears to be like stick figures, all with arms in different configurations. A creature that touches this door without first disabling the trap causes lightning to envelop the tower. Any creature outside the tower and within 10 feet of the door, which is obviously going to be whoever opened the door, is going to have to make a DC 15 dexterity saving throw or take 4d10 points of lightning damage. And they have disadvantage on that dexterity saving throw if they are wearing armor made of metal. So yeah, screw you paladins and fighters. This is a big deal because not only does lightning envelop the tower all around in every direction, this lasts for a whole 10 minutes. Which means that if anybody tries to do anything clever or funny or stupid, then they're once again going to be subjected to that lightning damage. And mind you, when you go up to it the next time, there is no dexterity saving throw. You just automatically take the lightning damage because the lightning's already there. It's enveloping the tower. The third time this trap is triggered, the magic fails and causes the tower to collapse. Each creature inside of the tower, when it collapses, takes 24d10 points of bludgeoning damage, while those within 20 feet must succeed on a DC 15 dexterity saving throw or take 8d10 points of bludgeoning damage with falling debris. The collapse not only destroys the tower, but most of its contents, including the animated armor at the very top, and is going to jack up everything and make your life miserable. Your players can go ahead and search around the debris for stuff, and every hour that they do, there's a 10% chance that a clay golem makes its way out and starts attacking the party. Or, of course, you're going to be getting to that clay golem, the animated armor, fairly soon here. But, of course, we want to figure out how your players can open up this door. Because if your players just show up, touch the door real quick, get electrified, and then they wait 10 minutes and go ahead and try it again, and then nothing happens except for more lightning. The third time, it's just going to explode, and then they're just going to be like, oh, that's that. Opening up this door is fairly simple. All they need to do is go ahead and trace a line from any one of the starting areas here. And, of course, that is the one to the upper left area, and, of course, the one to the right area. They can go ahead and start with any of their arms in any position, but they need to follow the line and recreate these symbols here. So if your party does this successfully, and they start moving their arms in any direction, perfect, that's awesome. They open up the door, no issue. But if they fail this, if they go ahead and just do dumb little arm positions here and there, then that is when true terror is going to strike. As a young blue dragon magically appears within 30 feet of the door and attacks all creatures it can see. The characters can keep trying to open the door while the dragon is attacking. The dragon disperses if it is reduced to 0 HP or the characters open up the door. So let's go ahead and backtrack here. Let's go to opening up the door. So how do you actually go about handling this? If you're playing in person, I would suggest that you go ahead and have the player go ahead and wave their arms all about because that is fun and, gets a lot more interactivity going on. But if you're playing, over voice or you have people that don't want to go ahead and do this, then go ahead and describe, okay, so what is your starting position? Do you have both arms down? Do you have left arm up, right arm down? Go ahead and describe it out. And go ahead and while they're describing it out, make sure that you're not giving away any tell and go ahead and ask them if their arm is up, down, left, right, straight, whatever. And, which one is left or right. And if they do it successfully, congratulations, they can open up the door. But if they go ahead and start doing it in any other direction, then bam, that dragon appears. Here's the scary thing about your players failing this. A young blue dragon appears. Young blue dragons are pretty freaking strong. This is an incredibly deadly encounter if your players do not prepare, essentially, If they don't know what's going on, then all of a sudden a dragon appears. It's presumably going to start breathing lightning all about, and it's going to just start biting and clawing into the party. Very dangerous stuff. So here's the interesting thing. We don't get any information about role-playing this dragon. The only information we get is that a dragon appears and just starts attacking the party. We, of course, know that dragons are intelligent creatures, specifically blue dragons in particular. It's got 14 intelligence. It's probably smarter than the average person. So the question is this thing actually sentient? Is it a being that is waiting at all times here? Is it just a sort of construct? Is it an illusion, perhaps? Who knows? I would go ahead and immediately decide what it is for your campaign, because I'm willing to bet that there's some groups that might try and parlay with the dragon. There's some groups that may try and do something in regards of trying to manipulate it in a certain way. So go ahead and decide immediately. Is this an actual dragon? Is it going to start bantering with the party? Is it going to just say, oh, thanks, I'm going to kill you now? Or is it just going to be a silent creature that just simply goes ahead and attacks and is monstrous? Whichever way you do, it's perfectly fine. Just make sure that if your players make a certain decision, it may or may not cost them. After opening up this door, your players will see that there is a vestibule, in which case they can go ahead and just step inside, and they can make their way past this little curtain into Area 4. In Area 3, we have the Rickety Scaffolding. If your players go ahead and see that scaffolding and decide to go ahead and start climbing it, they could discover that it could be some bad times, because the scaffolding can't support more than 200 pounds of weight. If it collapses, anyone standing on it falls 20 feet to the ground, taking 1d6 bludgeoning damage per 10 feet, of course, and they take an additional 2d6 points of bludgeoning damage from the debris. A creature underneath the scaffolding must succeed on a DC 13 dexterity saving throw, or take 4d6 points of bludgeoning damage from the falling debris. So the important thing to consider is, when you're looking at someone's character sheet, they're not only whatever weight that they have in their bio, you also have to take into consideration their gear. If you have a fighting type person, you know, they're 180 pounds or whatever, they're probably going to have more than 20 pounds of weight on them. And that's just a single person. If you've got multiple people that try to climb up this thing, they're going to cause the whole thing to collapse and hurt themselves. Pretty funny, really. Of course, a savvy group could go ahead and circumnavigate that. Maybe they start trying to do something clever, or maybe just have a huge whole party of light characters that drop all of their gear and go ahead and start scaling the scaffolding here, in which case it could theoretically be possible that they climb up and maybe get a better view of what's going on around. As a reminder here, your players could see that there's an opening to the tower in the scaffolding, and that's why they might go ahead and start climbing it. But once again, you know, heavy people are going to start breaking the thing, and even if you do have light people that go up there, then unfortunately they may discover that they don't know how to operate or go any further, and might even get into some more trouble. In Area 4, we have the tower first floor. When your players arrive in here, they'll be able to see that there is actually an elevator or a lift in here, and a whole bunch of crates. Pretty cool. But what's also really cool is standing next to the chains are 4 tall clay statues. These are, of course, clay golems. These clay golems' sole purpose is to operate this lift, but if they are attacked, because let's say you have a group that's really, really cautious and always shoots, you know, little statues, if they do that, then sucks for them. They're going to go ahead and ruin this whole place. The clay golems are going to go ahead and defend themselves, because why wouldn't they? If it appears that a creature wants to use the elevator, the golems lower the platform, then raise it to whichever level the creature specifies. They also heed the commands issued from above. They only obey commands having to do with raising and lowering the elevator. So you can't go ahead and say, defend the tower, or move out, or whatever. No, these things are staying here forever, and all they do is raise and lower this lift. This elevator ride isn't smooth, however. The platform rises and lowers 5 feet per round, and the movement is jerky. Even if one clay golem is destroyed, the remaining others can no longer operate the elevator and remain motionless until attacked. So if your players get cheeky and decide to destroy one of these things, then once again, they ruin this place forever, and now you gotta do some nonsensical lifting of this place on your own, and it's totally gonna suck. So something to note here is this place is actually really, really cramped, right? You know, these squares are only 5 feet. Clay golems traditionally are larger size, so as you can tell here, Roll20 in particular has gone ahead and shrunk the clay golems down, but in reality they'd be much, much bigger, which is potentially a big deal, because if they're all squeezed in here, then your players could be in for the fight of their lives, if of course they go up against these things. Once again, if your players have an escort here, whether that be Ezmerelda or Van Richten, they're going to know how to work this thing. They're going to simply say, hey, don't touch those clay golems. We're going to go ahead and just take the lift. At which point they're going to stand on top of the lift and take a long ride up. In Area 5, we have the tower second floor. Once your players slowly ascend up to here, your players are going to look around and see nothing. This place is just a partially collapsed little ruined area. So of course you might have a group of people who think this is Dark Souls, where, oh, there must be some hidden treasure here, I'm going to jump off the elevator. In which case they're going to be screwed, because if they jump off of this thing, each 5-foot section collapses under the weight of 150 pounds, and they'll go ahead and fall to the very bottom. So hopefully they don't go ahead and start killing themselves this way. In Area 6, we have the third floor, and once again, this is just another area which has no purpose because it is completely ruinous, and any part of this area can even support less weight. Each 5-foot section can support 50 pounds, and if they jump off here, then they are going to collapse down and fall even further, which is going to be even more deadly. They're going to be taking a lot more damage, so hopefully you don't have people jumping off for no reason. In Area 7, we have the tower 4th floor, and it's here where your players are actually going to see that this place is, 1, stable, but 2, it's clearly lived in. Van Richten has been using this place as a base of operations for a little bit, and he is making this place a little bit of a home. There is a standing suit of armor in the corner, which is actually an animated armor. However, it only animates if someone says the word loud, Kazan, within 10 feet of it. No one in Barovia would know of Kazan, really. He died a long time ago. So the question is, does Van Richten or Ezmerelda know? It doesn't say here that they do or don't know. I'm kind of conflicted on that. I don't know how Van Richten could have found out, saying the word Kazan out loud, but maybe it just happened to by accident. Maybe he figured out that this was Kazan's tower through some piece of information and said it out loud by accident when he was sitting at the table and he saw the statue animate. I think that's a little bit more reasonable. But I don't know if Ezmerelda would know that unless Van Richten wrote that down. And here's where things get a little bit macabre. A lavender aroma emanates from a wooden chest. And if your players open this up, they can see that it contains a severed head of a human Vistani named Yan. Its flesh has a waxy complexion and has been embalmed with magical oils. If someone casts Speak with Dead upon it, they will discover that this thing is totally able to remember what's going on. Yan reveals that he was banished from his Vistani clan for stealing. A half-elf bard named Rictavio offered Yan a ride in a carnival wagon. And unfortunately for them, things were a little bit tense for a few days. And after a little bit of time, Yan said, screw this, and tried stealing the wagon. But Van Richten said, nah, that's not happening, and decided to kill him. But not only did he just kill Yan, he decided to cut off his head and preserve it in a magical oil for later use. Pretty messed up. Yan believes that the half-elf plans to cause great harm to the Vistani and begs the characters to warn his people. He doesn't know where his body is. So that right there is pretty interesting. We have these two characters. We have Yan, who is obviously a bad guy because he stole from his own people and he attempted to steal from Rudolf Van Richten, or in his case, he thought it was Rictavio. And we also have Van Richten, who seems to be a good guy because he's trying to kill the vampire dominating this land, but he's also killing Vistani and cutting their heads off. Creepy. So this is really going to start informing your players on what's going on here if they don't know the full story. But if they do actually talk to Yan, that can be a fun little scenario here where your players have a severed head of a guy and maybe they go ahead and go on some epic quest to try and find Yan's body and lay him to rest finally. We don't get any information about what Rictavio did to Yan's body, but I'm sure there's a lot of fun things you can come up with. Maybe Rictavio simply just threw it to the side and it's been eaten by wolves. Maybe he went ahead and threw the body into the Lake Baratok right behind them. Maybe the body is hacked up to pieces and buried in the floorboards of this very tower, like the Tall Tale Heart. I'm sure there's a lot of fun things you can do with retrieving Yan's body and putting him to rest. But your players may not go to such extreme depths to go ahead and find this guy's body. and your players may not actually ever get the chance to, so maybe you don't need to sweat it too much. But I certainly believe there's some inspiration to be thrown out there if your players pursue the finding of this guy's body. If your Fortunes of Ravenloft card reading leads to Van Richten's tower, then it is revealed that the treasure is in a narrow compartment hidden in the wall behind the suit of armor. Fortunately, the tower isn't that complex, so if they know for a fact that it is hidden in Van Richten's tower, they probably don't have to be going too far out of their way to go ahead and look for this thing. Unfortunately, however, if they went through the process of blowing up this tower, then they're going to have to take a long time trying to find their item. They find the treasure after 1d8 plus 2 hours of searching through the rubble, and of course for each hour they spend, there's a 10% chance that a clay golem emerges and starts attacking them. And that is it for the locations of Van Richten's tower. Really not too much going on here. Really, the more important part of Van Richten's tower is the roleplay elements that you'll be having once your players arrive here. Whether they meet up with Ezmerelda or Van Richten, or they go ahead and decide to make this place a little fortress because it is relatively safe, all things considered. No magic can go ahead and make its way into this tower. So if your players are getting hounded by magical entities such as the Druids or the Brovian Witches or even Strahd himself, then they could find some relative peace and safety here, which could be fun. Of course, on the other hand, if you have a high magical party, then this place sucks. If you have a high magical party, then they are probably not going to enjoy being powerless while inside of this location. So that's going to be entirely a party-by-party basis. So now with the locations out of the way, let's dive into the special events. The first special event we have here is Pack Attack. If your characters blew up Ezmerelda's wagon, or if the tower collapsed, it is going to generate a ton of noise. Something you gotta remember about the lands of Barovia. This place is pretty freaking silent. There really isn't too much going on. There's not that big hustle and bustle of the city, and of course there's not industry going on, so any loud noise is going to carry throughout the valley. It can be heard as far away from as Kresk and Vallaki, so everyone's gonna know about this. Everyone's gonna be probably terrified of a massive explosion that happens, right? But not a particular group. A group of werewolves is going to hear this explosion and decide to go ahead and check this out. After an hour's time, a werewolf pack is going to arrive and they're going to see what's going on here. This hunt is led by a one Kirill Storyanovich. He's a werewolf that is even stronger than the rest of his pack. He has a whole 90 hit points, so he's pretty freaking tough. He's going to be joined by a pack of 6 werewolves and 9 wolves. Pretty menacing force all in all. If your players had the adventure hook of Werewolves in the Mist, this could be cathartic because your players could finally arrive and deal with some of the werewolves that they were sent to go deal with in the first place, and that could be very good. But if they haven't had any dealings with werewolves so far, then this could prove very terrifying. So really the main draw of this special event is if your players did not make their way inside of this tower because they got afraid or they blew up the thing and decided to take a short rest outside, then unfortunately for them, they are going to get jumped by these wolves. If they are still outside of this tower, then they are going to fall prey to the wolf attack and are going to have to fight. And unfortunately, there's really not that big of an area to go to, because the area isn't that big. The werewolves and the wolves will easily be able to landlock them, so unless your players are confident in swimming around here, then they're probably going to have to go ahead and deal with the werewolves right there, right in front of the tower. But if your players made their way inside of the tower, then Kirill is going to show up with his forces and try and lure out the party. The werewolves know of the tower's magical defenses, so Kirill's not going to go ahead and move up and touch the tower and get electrified, but he is going to stand there. Because unless they have a huge supply of silvered weapons, then they're probably not going to be able to actually damage the werewolves from inside of the tower. And yes, if they do have a magical bow and they shoot from in here, then it's not going to work. That's typically what most people work with. But if your players do have enough silvered arrows or whatever the case may be, they get creative and start flying around up top, then of course Kirill is going to draw his forces back and wait to ambush them later on. Depending on the rapport that your players have with the werewolves so far, whether that be non-existent or they've already had some run-ins with the werewolves, this could prove pretty interesting. If your players haven't had any interactions at all with werewolves during the entirety of this adventure, then the first time all these werewolves showing up in mass could prove very scary, especially if Kirill is the only werewolf and they only see a huge pack of wolves, and then during the fight, some of the wolves transform into werewolves, that's going to get them terrified. They're going to be looking around saying, ooh, which wolf is going to transform next? Who knows? So hopefully your players are able to go ahead and drive the werewolves away, or maybe even capture a few. Hopefully they don't get wiped by these things, because that would suck. But if your players are successful, then they can go ahead and potentially get the whereabouts of the children that have been kidnapped. They are being held in a cave to the west, and that is the werewolf den, which will be covered in a later video. So of course, something I always recommend is if you have a large group of forces go up against a small group of forces like your players, you should have them have some sort of morale system where a certain criteria is met and the enemy decides to run away. That could, for the werewolves instance, be half of them dying, they look around and see that they go ahead and just decide to run away. Or in these werewolves instances, it could be their pack leader dying, Kirill, and then they, at that point, decide to run away. Don't have them fight to the bitter end because that makes them look too stupid. You should go ahead and make these people seem intelligent enough, and of course have them for use in a later day. The second special event we have here is Ezmerelda's Retreat. Ezmerelda returns to Van Richten's tower after confronting Strahd at Castle Ravenloft and barely escapes with her life. She arrives on the back of a horse that she stole from the Vistani camp outside of Vallaki. She's going to show up here and get some weapons, and she's going to go ahead and make her way inside of the tower. And you can go ahead and play this up however you want. If your players see this as soon as they appear, then Ezmerelda can go ahead and say, hey, I don't know who you are, but I've got Strahd chasing after me, let's go. But you could go ahead and play this a little bit later as well. Maybe you say that after a certain number of hours they've been here, then Ezmerelda arrives. Of course, if your players were here long enough and accidentally blew up Ezmerelda's wagon, she's gonna be pissed. I would be too if someone blew up my car and that had all my fancy stuff in it. If your players accidentally blew up the tower, she doesn't stick around here for long, and she is only gonna work with the party if they seem like they're her best hope for survival. Because of that fight that she had with Strahd, she only has 30 hit points left. She's going to gladly accept any sort of healing that the party has to offer. So this is something to consider. If your players show up here, then you have to consider what type of relationship they have with Ezmerelda. Do they already know who she is? If they do, then that's great. But if they don't, then of course this could prove a very tense first time meeting because they see that she's all battered up, and especially if they pissed her off by destroying her wagon, then she's going to have some choice words to say with them. But, of course, if they seem like they're on the up and up, and your players are the only hope for Ezmerelda, then she's going to go ahead and stick around with them. If they blew up the tower, Ezmerelda's going to say, hey, I don't know who you are, but let's go ahead and go somewhere else. In which case, she may go ahead and say, let's go to Kresk and make our way to the Abbey of St. Markovia. Maybe that'll be a better place for us. Consider the options in regards of where you want Ezmerelda to potentially try and lead the party if that is what is going on here. Maybe your players piss off Ezmerelda so much that she doesn't want anything to do with them, in which case she's just going to go off on her own and leave the players to their own devices. The interesting development here is that from this moment on, Strahd gains a new goal: kill Ezmerelda. Knowing that his Vistani spies may be conflicted in this because Ezmerelda is a Vistani, Strahd goes ahead and contracts his druids and werewolves in the Svalak woods to go ahead and spy on the location all around and try and help and kill Ezmerelda. And also a very interesting note here is it also says human spies and vampire spawn located in the Barovian settlements. So that's always something to consider. You always have to be careful who you can trust. If Strahd learns that she is with the characters, then he is going to go ahead and invite them to Castle Ravenloft because he wants to get Ezmerelda to the castle again, and at which point he's totally going to try and kill her. And that is it for all the special events. I think 2 is a little bit too low for this location because I think it could prove very fun and useful. Something I would recommend doing is maybe if you don't want to have werewolves already thrown into this adventure, you could go ahead and replace it with Barovian witches. Barovian witches are a very fascinating thing to me. I love them because, 1, that art's fantastic, but 2, I just think that they can prove very interesting because, as written, they don't really come up too much in the campaign, but they can be very, very devastating for parties. Specifically because they can spy on the party a lot with their familiars, but more importantly, they can fly around. As we can see here, Barovian Witches typically aren't that strong by themselves. They're only a half rating challenge, AC 10, HP 16. They're only 3rd level casters, so they don't really have too much going on here. But the interesting thing is that if they're flying, that could prove devastatingly strong. In fact, if they're flying, that could prove theoretically impossible for some groups to even hit them. So perhaps your players arrive to Van Richten's tower and cause the explosion to go off or cause the tower to blow up, or maybe they just sit around here for some time and are debating about what to do. Perhaps maybe a squadron of Barovian Witches is flying around here and happens to notice that there's some activity on the island. Maybe they go ahead and start doing some magical drive-bys, flying in the sky, cackling maniacally, and shooting off some rays of frost and hideous laughters and rays of sickness. I think that could be a lot of fun, because not only would your players be going up against these Barovian Witches, but if the Barovian Witches decide to dismount, or if they got shot off from their brooms, then they could be possessing animated brooms, which go ahead and start beating up on the players too. I think that could be a ton of fun. I say you should always take into consideration swapping out monsters that show up in an encounter, because maybe you want to save them for a later date. I personally think that werewolves should not be out in force all the time. I think they should certainly be at special events, which this is of course a special event, and can inform your players a bit about the world around them. But maybe you go ahead and swap some things around. I love me some Barovian Witches, so you should totally use them in your campaign. And just like that, we are done with Van Richten's tower. Not really too much going on here, but this place could prove very fun and very useful. If your players show up here with Rictavio, then all of a sudden he can reveal himself for what he really is. He is Rudolf Van Richten, famous vampire hunter. Maybe this is the first time your players meet with Ezmerelda, and she tells your players all about everything. Maybe your players are kicked out of all the other towns, and this is the only place that they can have a roof over their head. You know, there's a lot of fun things you can do with this tower. And it really just comes down to the campaign that you're running, and more importantly, the campaign that your players are forging. So go ahead and tell me, is Van Richten's tower going to be significant in your campaign? Or is it going to just be a place that they stop by once and that's that? Is this place going to hold a lot more mystery and excitement? Or is this going to be some rickety old tower that gets blown up because your players don't know how to do any type of puzzle at all? Is this place going to come under attack? Or is it one of the safe bastions left in this entire land? Tell me all about it, because I want to know. That is going to do it for me for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my amazing patrons up here. You guys are absolutely awesome. Thank you so very much. Next video, we will be diving into Argenvostolt, a house that is long been silent. That is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.